All right, welcome everyone to, welcome to Hack Mobile Part 3. This will be the second Flutter workshop, so Flutter Part 2. So for this workshop, we'll be going over some more advanced Flutter concepts, continuing off from last workshop. So if you want to follow along, the slides are right here. acmurl.com/flutter3. It's a little confusing because this is the third workshop in the Hack Mobile series, but it's the second Flutter workshop. And I apologize for that. So, and if you want to get the code as well, acmurl.com/flutter repo. You'll need Flutter and Android Studio installed if you didn't get those done last workshop. So be sure to have that if you want to follow along. So anyway, let's move on. So learn Flutter 2 with an exclamation mark is the check-in code. Be sure to check in at members.acmucsd.com for free points that are not very useful at the moment. Yeah. All right, so in case you missed last workshop, I'm just going to give essentially a quick summary of what we did. So we learned about widgets, first of all. So these are essentially the building blocks of UI in Flutter. And they're inspired a lot by components in React, if you're familiar with that. So essentially, apps in Flutter are widget trees that start at the top and sort of branch inward. And they come in two different types, stateless and stateful widgets. So stateless widgets lack state. They don't track any changes to data, and they're used to display static data typically. So this would be analogous to like dumb components in React, if you're familiar with that style of programming. Stateful widgets are a little more complicated. They're divided into two separate parts, which stores any static values. And then stateful widget, which stores static values, and the actual state object, which stores the layout and the state. And modifications to the state are done through the setState function to let the widget tree know that it needs to update. So here's just an example I showed last time. There's a lot of code here, but this is just what a basic stateful widget looks like. So progress so far. Last time we wrote a really basic single screen app that just demonstrates some simple Flutter concepts. So we just made a widget, we made a really simple screen, and then we added state to it. So if you want the code for that, that's linked here. And as a sort of demo, this is what we have so far. At least I think this is the correct. Yeah, this is okay. So let me actually just check out master. It's the same code. Okay, so here we just have a simple screen, and then we just have a thing that adds these widgets. So not super functional at the moment, but we'll be building off of this in this workshop. So today's agenda, we'll be going over some more UI stuff. So we'll be creating a second screen that lets us modify tasks and create new tasks as well, like custom tasks with our own title and description, and then navigation to go between screens. And then we'll be creating widgets programmatically, and then finally ending it off with gestures, such as swiping and long pressing on widgets. So before we begin, I just want to make some small adjustments to our app. These are essentially just aesthetic changes, so you don't have to do them. So one thing I'm going to do is just clamp the scrolling list view to the home page and add some spacing between the heading and the app bar. So to do that, it's not very complicated. Let's see here. So all we're going to do is in my homepage state, we're just going to add a primary field. this is a named parameter to list view. So that's going to be right here. And set it to false. Essentially what this would do is, now as you can see, we can't scroll. I'm trying to click on this right now and drag it, we can't scroll. Essentially what this does is that when we're not overflowing, then we aren't able to scroll, which makes sense, right? We don't want to have to we don't want to keep track of scrolling and stuff when, we don't need to scroll. But if we do go over, now we suddenly get the ability to scroll. So that's all this line does. Yeah, so this just prevents the list view from scrolling when there's no overflow. And also, we're just going to add some spacing here. This is the hack I talked about before, where you can do this in Flutter, where you just stick these invisible sized boxes to just add spacing to your layout. So we don't have to make a whole padding widget and stuff and wrap this whole thing around it. This just makes it a lot easier. As you can see now, there's a little spacing up here, which just makes it look a little better. So yeah, these are just some small changes. They're not really needed. All right, next up, editing and creating new tasks. So we're going to create a new screen entirely that lets us create and edit tasks. And this is going to contain 2 inputs. So these are going to be text field widgets, and then a floating action button to create the task. And here's just some icons and some text here to sort of label the fields, just to make it look a little better. So let's see. So if we're going to be thinking about layouts again, applying what we learned from the last workshop, we can use the concept of nesting rows and columns to create this layout, right? So we can break this down. So this whole layout is essentially a big column that contains these 4 things, right? A row, text field, row, text field. And then each row contains 2 things, right? A task name and an icon. Excuse me. So this is just a really simple way of thinking about this. All right, so let's just start coding then. So let's just build a screen to create tasks. So here, we'll start in our lib folder. So this is where everything goes. Remember, all the code goes inside of the lib folder that we'll be writing. Then we'll be creating a new file. Here. We'll call it edit task.dart. And right now, this doesn't need to be a stateful widget, but we'll just make it stateful because it'll be useful later. So again, using the Flutter snippets, you can just type stateful W, and it'll create it for you. And you can just type in the name of the widget. So super convenient for that. It looks like we need to import stuff. So import, okay. Right, okay. So now, child is not really a thing, right? So we need to change this. So to make a screen in material, you'll need essentially a scaffold. And this essentially decides what, this gives you a basic layout template that looks like this, essentially, to build your layout from. So I'm just gonna write it out here just so it's, it's easier than explaining. So app bar, so scaffold contains an app bar, which we can title with whatever we want. In this case, we'll just say edit task what is this complaining about? Oh, right, no, I'm dumb. Title needs to be a text widget. Task. Okay, and then next up we have the body, which we'll fill in later. I'll just make this null for now. And then lastly, we have the floating action button. Right, so this is just the 3 components that we have from the previous thing, right? It's the app bar, the body here, which we'll fill in, and then the floating action button. So this is a floating action button widget here. Don't want it to autofocus. I don't know. And it needs an on press, which we're not going to do anything with for now. And then child, this will specify what actually goes inside of the floating action button. In this case, we just want an icon, and that is icons.send, I think. Yeah. This gets us our basic layout. And real quick, we're just going to replace the home screen with edit task, just so we can see what it looks like. So instead of my home page, we're just gonna comment this out. So as you can see, this is just an empty layout because that's all we have. But it's a start, right? So we have this and this. So now we're gonna actually write the body of the thing. And the body here contains, first of all, a column. And the children of this column are going to be a row. Right, going back to what we have here. A row, a text field, a row, a text field. So row, text field, row, text field. Getting echo is that a problem for anyone else? My audio. Yeah, my own audio seems to be fine. I don't know. Anyway, and within this row, right, we're gonna have 2 elements here. So we're gonna have the check, this icon here, and then task name or description, right? So this is just a text field. So here, children, icon, this is going to be a check, and text, let's say task name. Oh yeah, I didn't explain this before, but the trailing commas you see here, this is actually encouraged in Flutter because it helps the formatter make things look nicer. So yeah. Anyway, let's fill in the thing for the other row. I think icons dot subject, and then text description. So very simple so far. We have this. And looks like right, okay, so this looks kind of ugly at the moment, right? So we're just going to add some extra things to make it look less ugly. So sized box, I think I used 24, but you could use any number you want. Just add some spacing between the 2 elements. And then lastly, we'll wrap this whole thing in a padding element. So you just click wrap with padding there, and it'll give you that. What numbers? 24, 48, and 48. I don't know why I chose those numbers. They probably just look nice. There we go. So literally just like 2 lines of code and this thing looks way better, right? So this is pretty much the UI for this, the actual like layout for this done, right? And this is the solution code, which hopefully matches what I have. Oh, it looks like one more thing. Okay, so we want to be able to. Oh, this comes later. Okay. So we'll just ignore this. So going back, sorry. Task here. This is a new object that I created later. And then screen title. I guess we could add that now. So we want to be able to customize the screen title because eventually we'll be using the screen for both creating and editing tasks. So I wanted to say new task versus edit task, depending on what context it's in. So we'll just throw that in here as a prop, because it doesn't need to be stateful, right? This thing doesn't need to change dynamically. It just needs to, be set when we enter the screen. So screen title. And to add that to the constructor, we could just do this.screen title as a shorthand. And then here, instead of edit task, we'll just replace this with widget.screen title. So whenever you want to access fields of the widget, you in the actual state, you do it in widget.whatever, and it'll access this. This is just needed because these are technically different objects. But yeah. Okay. And then in here, we need to specify the screen title. Screen title, you can say whatever I like. I don't know. And then we need to save everything. Yeah. So now we have a custom screen title that we could change. All right, cool. So next up, navigation. So we'll be figuring out how to go between our 2 screens now that we created, right? Because all we have now is just an edit task screen and then a home screen. And we don't really have a way of going between them, right? We can change what this field is if we just like comment this out or something, right? But this is not user friendly, right? I don't want to have to go into the code to change screens. So that's what navigation is. Now Flutter has 2 separate approaches for navigation. So there's the declarative approach, where the UI depends on the application state. This is kind of a newer thing introduced in Flutter 2. So, and it's much harder to understand and implement. Like, trust me, I wanted to teach this in the workshop and I straight up could not understand it, because there's a lot of things you need to do. But the gist of it is, conceptually, it kind of makes sense, right? You want your UI to depend solely on application state. So whatever screen you want to be on, you'll always be there, essentially. And there's other concepts like deep linking and stuff that are involved with this. So there's an article here, if you just want to learn more. Yeah, it's really interesting. I think it's written by one of the actual Flutter developers. So yeah. Anyway, but the other approach is imperative navigation, where we construct the UI and then just manipulate it around it. So imperative means like commands, right? So essentially we're making several screens and then we're saying, okay, when we click this button, right, we're going to go to this screen. And then when we click this button on this screen, we're going to go back or something like that. So this is the older way of doing it in Flutter 1.0. This is actually much easier to understand, in my opinion. And it's very similar to React Native in the way that it handles it. So this is the actual approach that we'll be going. So imperative navigation, we'll be treating the navigator as a stack of screens, right? So because it's stacked, there's 2 important methods, push and pop. So navigating to a new screen essentially means to push it onto the stack, right? And navigating to a previous screen means popping it from the stack. So we have our home screen here, we go to the next screen, ends up here. Popping it means navigating back means popping it off. So this is what the syntax looks like for that. All right, so navigator.push. We need to pass a context object here. This is just needed for this builder function here. I'm not going to explain context. I don't really understand it myself all that much, but just know that this is kind of needed. And then we have material page route. So pages or screens are called routes in Flutter, essentially. And that's what this does. And we're essentially telling it to build the screen. I think it's kind of like self. There's also this in Flutter, so that's also different. I think context involves, it's useful for things like theming and stuff, when you have like different themes in different contexts. I don't fully understand it, unfortunately, so this is just kind of a thing in a lot of mobile development is context. It's just an important concept that I guess I never learned. But yeah. And then popping is pretty much the same thing. There is something interesting though, is that you can actually send data back to the screen that you pushed from. So here in the second field here, rather than specifying the screen to go back to, right? Because it's just gonna pop. It kind of ignores whatever. It doesn't really matter what screen you're going to, but you're going back to, because it just pops in the stack. So whatever screen happens to be underneath is what you'll get. So the second field here is for any data you want to send back. And this will be useful later when we create a new test, right? So live coding here will be implementing some really basic navigation. So first of all, navigating to the task screen. So here, we are pushing the edit task screen onto the navigation stack, right? So we'll do this here in the main.dart file inside of the floating action button. So rather than creating a new task, right, creating a new task in the object, or yeah, in the list, sorry, we'll be navigating to the screen that lets us create tasks. So that's what this is. So let's see, in here, so here on pressed, instead of add task, we'll be using a function here that will call, okay, material or navigator push. Wanted to push the context and material page route. The builder for this is just going to return the edit task widget with the screen title new task. So if we change this back, now whenever we click the plus button, we're now at this new screen. So that's going back one way. If we click the back button here, actually, this will just take us back. So that's already nice. But we want a little more than that, right? So next up, navigating back from edit task. We already have a back button, but we also want the send button here to go back. So let's just add that in. So in the onPressed function here, we'll just do, okay, navigation or navigator pop, and we'll just pass in the context. So now when we click this button, it'll go back. Click this button, it goes forward. So pretty basic. But now how do we create our own tasks, right? We want to actually have custom titles and descriptions, right, each time. So before we begin, we're just going to do some refactoring, which means essentially restructuring or reorganizing our code. And this will be done so that our code is better equipped to create and delete and edit the tasks. So rather than storing the task widget in the state, we'll instead store task objects in the state. And the task widgets will be generated with what's called a Listviewbuilder. Right, so this might be kind of difficult. So I'll just kind of slowly walk through this. Before we go on, so let's see. Inside of task.dart, we're going to create a new object called task, or a class called task. Now, in the constructor here, we have, let's see, what field does it need? Well, we need a title for the task, right? And we need, oh shit, what the, my mistake. And then we need a description. Okay. And then for indexing purposes, I'm also going to add a key. So this key is essentially useful for, it's essentially a unique key that we can refer to this task by. So every task is going to have its own unique key. So anyway, task. So in the actual constructor, let's fill in the parameters here. So this will essentially automatically assign everything that we pass in. That's pretty much all we need for this task, this class, task object, whatever. So next up is the Listviewbuilder. So that's going to be in main.dart. So here this needs to change. So the task widget, right? Instead of task widget, we're going to make this task. And this is going to be obviously as a result. So we're just going to make this out. So now in the actual list builder, you know, set here. Okay. We are going to change this up here. So instead of ListView, we're going to do ListView.builder. And so there's a few things we got to change. So item count, this specifies how many items are in the actual ListView. For this, we're going to do something fancy where we do tasks equals null. So we're going to check if the list is null, first of all, or if it's empty, essentially. Then this is a ternary statement. So if it is null, then there's only going to be one element, which is going to be this. And if it's not null, then we'll give it as many elements as the length plus 1, because we need to accommodate the header. And instead of children here, we're actually just going to comment this out. So instead of children here, we'll do item builder. And this is a function that we pass in that lets us actually construct each widget in the list view. So first, if index is 0, so if this is the first widget, let's just create a column with these things in it. So return column, children, like that. And I'll uncomment this. And I'm just going to return null at the very end just so I could get this thing to stop doing that. Okay. So now, if it's the first element, we're just going to return the column of the 3 widgets that we have here. So it's just a size box, some text, and another size box. This is just for the header. Right, and then we're going to add another line outside here where we subtract the index by 1. Because everything's off by 1 now because we have this first element here. Then we're going to check, is that what we did here? Yeah. We're going to check if tasks index. So we're going to check if the current task is actually null, right? This is useful for just making sure we don't get any bugs. So then we're going to create the actual widget. So let's just say current widget equals task widget. with the key being task index key, the title just being tasks index title. Description is also tasks index description. So all we're doing is essentially assigning the task object to an actual widget now. Let's see. Okay. Semicolon, and then we need to actually return current widget. I guess you could just return this directly. I don't know why I had it like this. Yeah, and then the return null at the end. This should never really happen, but this is just needed so that we always return like something, because this is a function that needs to return something. So anyway, let's just save. Oh, yikes. I love bugs. Give me a sec. Okay. I know what I'm doing. Okay, so why do we need to do this? So this is mainly a sort of software engineering, a higher level kind of concept thing, is to decouple state from the UI. So a state should determine how the UI renders, but it shouldn't contain UI elements itself. And one reason why is that widgets themselves are immutable. So we can always change the state of widgets, right? But we can't change widgets themselves. And it wouldn't really make sense to add state into the task widget, right? Because task widget doesn't really need to change dynamically, right? It only displays some static data here and here. So adding state to this is kind of semantically incorrect in a way, right? We're gonna have to keep track of state for every single widget here. That's not gonna be ideal. You know, it's much easier to track state for everything and then create widgets based off of that. So this will be helpful later since we have dedicated task objects that we can work with. So eventually we want to be able to just create and delete objects. And then the UI is just going to update to reflect what is in the list of objects. So yeah. All right, now onto the good stuff. So we can actually pass a newly created task back to the home page. And then the home page, all it needs to do is just take that and add it to the list and update the state accordingly. Right, and this is done with text field controller classes. I think it's not actually text field controller, it's text editing controller, I apologize. So essentially the way they do this is, if you're familiar with React, right, the way you handle text input in React is you track that in a state variable, and then you change that state every time the text field changes. But here we have our own class, text editing controller, not text field controller, that handles the state essentially for text field independently from the widget. So all we need to do is declare it here. This is the syntax. We just declare it here with the initial value, or you could just pass in nothing. When we're actually declaring the widget for text field, we just specify, okay, this is the controller that goes with it. And then in order to access the actual text, we just do controller.text. And that gets us the current text in the text field. So in edit task.dart, we're going to need to add this in. So final, we don't need to specify the type because it can just automatically infer it for us. We need a controller for the name. This is a text editing controller. And we need a controller for the description. So we'll just say controller name, controller description, text editing controller. Okay, makes sense. And then we'll just assign these controllers into the text field. So controller name. So this, the first one handles the task name, so we'll have it be controlled by controller name. And then here we have controller description. And then, okay, here we need to actually handle disposing of these. So this is essentially clean up after we're done with this screen. We don't want these states to linger, right, next time we go in here. So that's what this is for. So we can override the dispose function here. So controller name dispose. We just need to call this here controller description. And then call the super class method here. Right, so hopefully that makes sense. Then we need to pop the screen from the stack. So this is done here. So we already have the navigator.pop, but now we need to pass a new task object back. So task is here. Then we need to create a task with title. And I believe that's done with controller name.text and description, controller description.text. Looks like we got to import this. Yes. I don't actually know what I'm doing, apparently. Okay. There we go. Okay. So what this does is that it sends back the task object to the home screen that we wanted. So we'll just do this here. I think this is what we have. Yes. Okay, good. Oh, right. Before we continue. All right. Key. We're going to assign a unique key to this. So we could just type unique key, and this will automatically generate a random key that's guaranteed to be unique. Right. So this key will be useful for indexing later. When we want to find an actual specific task that we want to delete, we can just refer to it by the key. So finally, in main.dart, we need to make some adjustments to the actual onPress. So first of all, let's make this an async function. So why are we doing async? Well, the navigator pushing it is actually kind of like an async function in that we can get the result from it by awaiting. So essentially waiting for this navigation to finish. And when it finishes, it'll actually return this new task that we sent over. So new task, I think is a better variable name. Add a comma there. And then what do we need to do? Well, we need to add task, new task, right? But add task isn't populated yet, so we'll just add this in. So add task is going to take in a new task. And then we're going to essentially go into tasks and just add it in, right? Task.add, new task. Pretty simple. But we can't forget to update the state, right? If we just add this task in, it's not going to work because it just changes the variable and then it doesn't update the state. So putting it inside of the set state function here lets us update the state accordingly. Since you have an error, I forgot to add a semicolon. Okay. So now, using async await, we can retrieve the task object that we sent from edit task. And yeah, so now we can see if everything works, right? So if we create a task, okay, I don't know, finish live coding session, Flutter workshop, right? And we click send, it works, right? We can create our own task with custom names and descriptions. We just type some random stuff, right? That's pretty cool. So if you're following along, just try to create your own task and see if everything works. Hopefully nothing breaks. So next up, deleting tasks. right? We can create task. What if we want to create? What if we want to delete task? Right? What if I accidentally type this in and it's just wrong? Right? This is like stupid. This doesn't mean anything. I want to get rid of it. Or maybe I finished the task and I want to get rid of it. So we're going to implementing swipe to delete. And that's done through the use of dismissible widgets. So Flutter contains a widget called Dismissible, which allows us to easily implement swiping gestures. So that's done here. So let's see. So inside of the actual task widget, we're going to wrap the container here in a dismissible widget. So all we're going to do is just click wrap with widget, and it'll do it for us. And this is called a dismissible. And there's just on dismiss. And now typically you'd write your function here, but we're not actually going to do that because we want to modify the actual state of the home screen, right? We want to get rid of this task. So instead, what we're just going to do is pass in a function here. So final on dismiss. We'll pass it in through the constructor. And here, we'll just pass it in like that. Yes. That's a yikes. Give me a sec. Apologize for this. Oh, right. Okay, so dismissibles need a key. So we'll just get that from the key of the widget. There we go. So now next up, we're going to pass it in through here, right? In the actual on dismiss of the task widget. So that's going to be done here. So let's see. In here where we're creating it, add a field called on dismiss. This actually does take in an argument called direction. So if we want different actions for swiping left versus swiping right, we can do that. We're not actually going to be using it this workshop, but if you want to, you can. And then all we're going to do is remove the task from the list. So I think we can actually just do task. Okay, before we do that, this needs to go inside a set state function. And then we can just do tasks dot remove at index. I think that works. This is a little more solid, I think, because we're referring to the actual key rather than the index. Because indices can change, but the keys don't change. So let's just do that instead. Remove where element.key is equal to I guess we're still referring to the index here, so it shouldn't actually matter. So now, if we try swiping away, we can get rid of a widget like that. So if I create some new tasks here, I can get rid of these and it'll update accordingly. So pretty simple. So yeah, that's pretty much it for creating and deleting tasks. Now, what if we want to edit a task, right? We created a new task and we made a mistake or something, but we don't want to get rid of the whole thing. This one's going to be a little bit harder to implement. So we want to do this on a long press gesture because that kind of makes sense, right? We long press on something to edit. So When we long press on the widget, we need to do three things, right? We need to navigate to the edit task and pre-fill all the fields with the title and description, just for convenience, right? We don't want, let's say you have like a really long task, you don't want to have to rewrite all of that, right? And make sure you get everything right. Instead, it's just much easier if you click on it, and much more intuitive. You just click on it, and all the fields are already filled in with the text you're going to edit. When we hit send to navigate back to the home screen, we're going to send the newly modified task with it, right? And then in the actual home screen, we're just going to replace the corresponding task in the list. So we're just going to essentially swap the object, or just replace it, and then update the state accordingly so that the UI actually updates. Right. So how do we do these three things? So first of all, for long pressing, we need what's called a gesture detector. So Flutter contains this widget to help us detect gestures. It's kind of obvious, but there's a few supported gestures. So a few of the simple ones are on tap. You can have on tap up or on tap down, or just on tap. And this represents tapping the screen once. You have an on double tap, which just represents tapping the screen twice, and on long press, which is what we're using, which is tapping and holding it down. So these are just all named parameters in the gesture detector widget, and then you just pass a function to it which gets called when these gestures are used. So anyway, some live coding. Let's implement editing. This is going to be kind of hard, so hopefully I don't mess up here. So first of all, pre-filling the text fields, right? So this is going to be done with the actual controllers. So that's going to be an edit task. So in the actual controllers, if you try doing this widget dot, oh right, I guess I forgot to add this in. We're going to need to pass a task in here. And there's a chance this task might be null because when we're creating a new task, right, we're not going to pass in an existing task. If you try doing widget.task.title here, it's just not going to work, and you're going to notice this error. What? Okay. Instance number widget cannot be accessed and initialized. So what we actually need to do is put it in the init state function, which will actually initialize the state. So we can actually use this thing. So first I'm going to call the super method here. So this calls the actual init state by default. And then we're going to actually do it here. So controller name.text is going to be equal to widget.task. Right? Widget is how we refer to this. Because it might be null, we've got to add a question mark as a bit of a null safety thing. So set it equal to title. And then, so if this is null, if you don't have a task, we'll just make this an empty string. Or if somehow it doesn't have a title, I don't know. And we'll do the same thing for controller description. Widget.task question mark dot description. So if you're familiar with JavaScript, this is very similar syntax. These null checks are very useful. I think in older versions of JavaScript, they're not in here, but in newer versions, they are. So yeah, this just saves us having to write a ternary statement. All right, next up, sending the modified task back home. Right, so when we change the task, you want to be able to send the new task back home. So instead of creating a new task every time, what we're going to do is widget.task. We're going to check if this task exists. Or sorry, if widget.task not equal to null. Oh, what am I doing? It's out here. Okay. So if the task is not equal to null, okay, well, let's just change the fields in the task. So task dot title is equal to controller name dot text. Yes. Yeah. Widget dot task dot description is equal to controller description dot text. So we're creating, we're essentially modifying, not creating a new task. We're modifying the existing task. Anyway, after that, what we're going to do is, once we've modified the task, we still have to send it back, right? So we're going to do a check to see if it's null. And if it's not null, then we're going to send it back. Otherwise, we're going to create a new task with a unique key like this. So that's exactly what we do here. If we have a task, we modify and send it back. Else, we create a new task and send that instead. And notice here how we're not modifying the key, right? We don't need to because the key doesn't need to change. And it can't change because it's a final. All right, so next up, replace and update the state. So in the actual thing here, let's see. Oh, right, I forgot to actually add the gesture detector. So in the gesture detector, in the task widget, sorry, we're going to add a gesture detector. So that's going to go outside of container. We're going to wrap this in a widget again. Gesture detector. And typically, again, you'd have an on long press. You can specify other things like on double tap, right, on whatever. And typically, you'd write the function in here, but we're not going to do that. Instead, we're going to just pass the function in. So we'll do that here, this dot on long press, and then on long press. We'll save all this. So now in the actual builder, when we're building this thing, we're going to need to add, okay, on long press. What do we need? We need a function that's going to do what we want. So here we're creating a new route. Again, we're pushing to a new route. And we're sending some additional data with it. So this is going to be an async function, right? Because we need to get data back. Then we have final change task. So we changed it. Equals await navigator dot push. Context is just context. And the actual route or route is, let's see, it's going to be a material page route. With this builder here. And it's going to return the edit task with the screen title of, let's see, task. No, sorry. Screen title is just going to be edit task. Right. So previously we had new task. This we're doing edit task instead. And then task we'll just be passing in the current task. So that's just task index. If this saves, then hold on, I'm like blanking out here. Okay. So yeah, this is the change task. And then we need to update the actual state. That's just done here. I don't know why it's doing this. So in here, we're just going to do task index equals change task. And that's how I did it. Yep. So what this does is it replaces and it updates the state. And that's done with this long press, which gets passed in here to this gesture detector. So now, let's just demo and make sure everything works. So we're going to create a new task. we'll say, I don't know, finish 142 L lab today. Then we're going to long press, and there we go. We now have the fields pre-populated. Let's say you just want to say, I hate this class, right? Then you can just click send, and now notice how it's updated. And then we can do this with pretty much any number of widgets, right? Another task, description, I don't know. We have another task here. If we edit this, I can't spell. You can see it changes this. And if we do it to this original thing, instead of finish, let's just say skip, because I really don't want to do this lab. It'll change accordingly, and we can swipe the delete, right? So we pretty much have like all the database operations, but in just a localized app, right? We can create tasks, we can update stats, we can delete stats or tasks. So that's pretty much it for this workshop. At this point, we have pretty much a fully functioning to-do list app, but there's one major flaw you notice, right? Data does not persist between sessions and between devices. So if we just restart the app, all your data is gone because all the data is stored in this giant state here. Where is it? Here, right? And like this is fine if you're just building something to like, play around with, but if you want to actually have like a functioning app, this is not going to be great, right? Because like you don't want to restart your app and then just lose everything. And if you get a new phone, right, you want to be able to migrate your data over. So we're going to address that next workshop in the Firebase workshop next time. But yeah, that's pretty much it. We have a fully functioning to-do list app. So yeah, additional resources if you want to learn more. So Flutter Gestures, so these are the official documentation on gestures. So there's a lot more we didn't go over, right? We have things like, we have the taps, we have the double taps and stuff. We also have vertical drag and horizontal drag. So if you want to manually implement like swiping, this is how people used to do it before dismissible was a thing. Yeah, there's just all kinds of information here. Flutter Cookbook, this is such a useful resource. So it's another official Flutter documentation thing. But if you want to learn how to do something very specific, they pretty much have all these examples here and tutorials to teach you these very specific things. And then lastly, declarative navigation. So I touched on this earlier. This is a really complicated, but it's the new way of doing navigation in Flutter 2.0. So again, this links to the Medium article that I mentioned before. And as a bonus, you can actually look at the design docs for Flutter features. I didn't actually know they made these public, but like for example, here, notice, right? You can actually read their rationale behind why they, did this thing, did the things that they did in implementing this navigator here. So I thought this is pretty cool to share. Yeah, so that's pretty much it for this workshop. We didn't get a lot of people this time, but that's okay. Hopefully they'll watch the recording. So yeah, thank you all for coming.